Welcome into episode 379 of the Skate Podcast. I am Brian DeFelice, joined by Bridget Prue and Scott McLaughlin. Bridget and Scott, an 8-1 thumping up in Winnipeg, Manitoba is not the start to this Western road trip the Boston Bruins desired. Let's talk about what happened last night because that was an absolute shit show.
Are you sure that's not the start they wanted?
I mean, if it is, it's a bold strategy.
Have you asked them?
I have not, actually. I have not.
Thought about calling them this morning, but
guys, I have a silver lining. At least that wasn't one of the 10 o'clock games. Imagine staying up till 1 a.m. to watch that.
Oof.
No. Oof. Yes, it was an 8 o'clock start. We got to, witness it before going to bed. However, I'm pretty sure some people tuned out maybe after the 5th or the 6th or the 7th or maybe the 8th goal that the Bruins gave up.
Listen, Bridget, you don't have to be that harsh on the Bruins, okay?
I mean, that's just the numbers. The numbers don't lie. Scott, 8-1 loss. That is very rough. It was, and we talked about this right before we started. It was 3-1 going into the third period. Now, were they getting outplayed? Yes. Did it still feel within reach? Yes. Then it becomes 4-1 and you're thinking, okay, no, not today. It's not today. And then it just, when it started to rain, it poured and they end up, Arcan texted me, he said, well, they lost by a snowman or they gave up a snowman. But I was like, that's a very festive way to say they gave up 8 goals. They were bad.
They're celebrating Hanukkah.
Eight goals, there you go. But so my opening shift is basically kind of going back to something we talked about last podcast, which was when they get really tested, what do they look like? And we spent a chunk of it talking about, like, are people being critical, like too critical of them beating teams that they should beat, saying like it's not worth anything, or it's not, like, well, we want to wait to see the real test. Well, Winnipeg is the first of 5 road games. It's going to be the hardest game on the road trip just based on where Winnipeg is this year and how they've played and their goaltending. And they're obviously strong forward group, which we'll get into, but they did not pass this test. They did not look like they had a chance to get back in that once they're down by 2, like once they're, and then obviously beyond that, goaltending.
Forget not passing. This was like the kid who doesn't even get the free 10 points for writing his name correctly. Like, they didn't even do that.
No. They got 1 power play goal.
Yeah, I mean 1 for 2 on the power play, so that's
50%, baby.
If you want to try to draw a single positive from the game, it would be in the limited power play opportunities they got. They took advantage of one of them. Then you can also look at the game and say, well, okay, they only got 2 power plays because they didn't earn more than 2 power plays. And conversely, they were very undisciplined, and that's my opening shift, which is the Bruins just had situational undiscipline, and that starts a minute into the game where Trent Frederic just kind of, a bit of a boneheaded play, didn't need to, hit Perfetti in that situation at that angle, puts the Bruins behind the 8 ball. I thought Boston bounced back from that kill, thought they had a strong, first half of the first period, but then, Brandon Carlo, who I just think for the most part, guys, he's just, he just hasn't been great. I think that goes for a lot of the team in a game like last night, but you got to control your stick. We talked about it last episode. It's a vulnerable, thing to do, because if you get your stick high, whether you get the guy or not, chances are you're going to go to the box, and he takes a double minor. So that, shows he actually made contact. I'm forgetting who it was that he hit.
It was Kyle Connor, and you could tell he had a nice little gash on his chin the rest of the night.
So Carlo got his 4 minutes, well worth it, but Boston's not able to kill that 4-minute power play or penalty kill. So, and then just throughout the game, you're giving up goals late in periods, early in periods, just an undisciplined performance by Boston. And yeah, things snowball, and I just thought Winnipeg was far more on their toes than the Bruins were, and the Bruins aren't a good enough team to be playing on their heels. So just not a good enough effort.
No, it wasn't. And in addition to everything you guys have already touched on, my opening shift is about Jeremy Swayman, who was also not good enough, gives up a career high 8 goals. And obviously it's easy to sit here and say, oh, he got hung out to dry on some of those, which he did, absolutely. He also wasn't good enough on them. Especially, I feel like maybe like one of the Scheifele goals as Winnipeg gets to 3-0, maybe you can say you want to save, but the first 3 Winnipeg goals were pretty legit. But then it's 3-1 heading to the third, and the goal he gives up a minute 15 into the third, again, it's a bad turnover by Marchand inside the blue line. So yes, absolutely, start with guys in front of him not being good enough. But Kyle Connor, who obviously is a sniper, really didn't put the shot where he wanted to. He actually put it towards the middle of the net, and Swayman just still beat him under the arm as he was coming across. Then after that, just a few minutes later, Gabriel Velarde comes through the right circle, beats Swayman clean, blocker side. Game's over at that point. It's 5-1. But even after that, it's like, didn't feel like any sort of like personal pride kicked in. Swayman gives up a goal from the corner, just doesn't get it against the post. Like, I don't care what the score is or what the game situation is. You just can't get beat on that. Some of the post-game comments are interesting. Swayman said, obviously I know I can stop some of those. I need to stop some of those. I need to get better. Brad Marchand was asked, do you feel for Swayman being left in for all 8 goals? And I'll read his exact quote here. He said, not really. Everyone had a bad night. He was part of it. He's not singled out. I don't think anyone can look themselves in the mirror and say that they had a good game. So he's part of the group. He's part of the bad loss, which is all true, but is not something you ever really hear a player say about their goalie. Like even if the whole world knows that the goalie wasn't good enough, usually a skater will give a cliche answer to that along the lines of like, he wasn't the problem. We weren't good enough in front of him. So found that interesting. Would also, last quick note on Swayman, after Tuesday night, he now ranks dead last in the NHL in goals saved above expected this season, according to Money Pucks. So that is not where you want to be.
He's played 153 career games. This is the first time he's given up 8. I mean, not a lot of. I mean, I'm sure plenty of guys go their whole career without giving up 8. To be honest with you, like he's had a few 6s, had a 7, but this is the only time he's given up 8. And a lot of times that's because guys do get pulled after 4 or 5, and they don't have the ability to keep giving up goals because they get switched out. But yeah, the first time giving up 8, I'm sure not a great feeling. And Marchand isn't wrong with the post game comments that he makes, because that Appleton goal was awful. The one off the post, off Swayman, like from the goal line, like weird angle shot that doesn't normally ever go in. That was bad. And it wasn't the only bad one. So I don't know. It's just, it was a rough look for him. It was a rough look for the other guys. I don't know if you guys thought anyone had a good game, but definitely Swayman didn't look like the best goalie, didn't play up to the contract, which is, what keeps coming back to, because the contract was such a big story.
Well, you never want to put too much stock into one game, good or bad, whether you're talking about an individual or a team. So
I just read the season stats.
Well, no. I know, and that's where I'm going with this. So if it was just last night, you could chalk it up to bad night all around. Shit happens over 82 games. But I want to read something that I saw on Twitter last night after the game. Michael Sullivan on Twitter put out a stat that says 21 starts in 2024 for Jeremy Swayman. I think this dates back to the whole calendar year 2024. He has 21 starts in this calendar year. 4 starts
this season, right?
Well, there's one from January 4th against Pittsburgh.
21 starts is how many he has this season.
Okay. Well, in any event, so I may have butchered it because it's a little bit difficult to read exactly what he's saying here. But my point is, 4 starts with 6+ goals. At least that's what I'm reading here. And if it's 3, it's still too many. So he's giving up, a lot of goals multiple times this year already in a single game. So
you want me to read what they are? Because this was the worst. He gave up 7 against Dallas. He gave up 6 against Carolina, 5 against Columbus, 4 against Dallas, 4 against Florida, 4 against Montreal. Those are the highest ones that he's given up this year.
Yeah, I mean, in any event, the sentiment here is that people are scoring in bunches against them in far too many games, and that's not what, as you said, Bridget, when you sign, an $8.25 million contract annually before the season, and it was the biggest story in hockey. It's not good enough. Now, again, Jeremy Swayman's far from alone here. The team hasn't been good enough far too much this year, but he's one of the leaders and one of their best players. You have to talk about it.
He has 1 shutout, and he has only 3 games that he's allowed one or fewer, or 4 games where he's allowed 1 or fewer goals. 1 was a shutout, 3 were just 1-goal games. But that's not the numbers that he was having last year or earlier parts in his career. I was just trying to go quickly into some of the numbers he had from last year, and yeah, he had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 games where he allowed 1 or fewer goals.
Yeah, I mean, if you really want to simplify it, that's Bridget, as you're just reading through the numbers, he's given up 4 or more goals in 7 of his 21 starts this season. 1/3 of his starts, he's given up 4 or more goals. And the Bruins are 1-6 in those games. And again, it's not all on him, because these are all the games we've circled as these team collapses, right? That's, the 8 is against Winnipeg. The 7 is that Dallas game where they got blown out. 6 was the Carolina game. They got blown out. He got pulled. They eventually ended up giving up 8 in that one as well. 5 is the loss to Columbus. That was the last straw for Monty. 4 was the other Dallas game and Florida game, and then the Montreal one was the only win. It's those have been basically all the Bruins' worst games of the season, and it's the team in front of them too, but it's also him not stepping up in the biggest games against the toughest competition, which has now it's really a theme with this whole team and with Swayman that you can't ignore. It's almost every time they go up against one of the best teams in the league, they are getting run off the ice. They're not even competitive in some of these games. And I don't want to make it sound like they haven't had
all
any.
They needed was 1 more touchdown. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to make it sound like they don't have any good wins. There is a win over Toronto in there, Vancouver, who they're going to see again on Saturday.
They lost to Vancouver, didn't they?
Well, they lost to Vancouver, played well. So that they've had some good games against good teams, but just not nearly enough. Too many of them have gone like this, where they just get blown out and are not even competitive. And it's got to be, it's super disappointing, especially when it felt like they've been building up to this. It's not like this was the end of a long road trip or a back-to-back or something where you're I understand why they didn't have it. It's this is kind of this whole start of the Sacco era has been building to this game where it's okay, yeah, beat up on some lesser teams, start to rack up some points, but this is the one you circle of real test, and they just got destroyed.
Which is what we spent a lot of the end of last episode talking about. It was oh, you're ramping up. Individuals are ramping up. Mm-hmm. Everybody's had a little bit of time to kind of settle into Sacco and try to let the new defensive systems and the different mindset play out, and hopefully it's built up enough by this time. But clearly that was not the case. And I don't know if you guys had any positives to take from it at all.
Again, like I would say you went 50% on the power play for what it's worth. I mean, I guess that's, and Pasternak is the one who did it. In a vintage Pasternak fashion, which is, good to see, I suppose. And then I think, look, I think it's doesn't make a huge difference, but to see them going down, fighting in the third period, I mean, it's not a bad thing to see. I mean, at least it shows that, they recognize that they weren't good enough and they were trying to, take some sort of moral something out of the game. But like X's and O's wise, that's not comforting. But from a intangible perspective, I guess that was somewhat encouraging to see, but not, I don't know.
I guess what did out after, was it the 6th goal? Then you got to see the fight, so that was.
Well, what did you guys think of Trent Frederic fighting David Gustafsson? Because this has been like drawn quite a bit of controversy because David Gustafsson had never fought at any level. Trent Frederic has 37 fights, and clearly Winnipeg was pissed about this. That's why you get the second fight right after, and then you get Lohrei, their captain, dropping with Zadorov. And, I think it's Frederic going after a kid who's never fought before, and B, like, he did take an extra shot when he was down. And Gustafsson was hurt. Like, he left, and I think you have to assume that's a concussion. But what did you guys think of that?
Well, it was a one-punch fight, so yeah, that probably leads you to believe that. Well, technically he threw a second one, kind of, but like it only took one punch.
3 altogether.
But like it was the first punch that it was over. Like that's probably where he got hurt, was the first punch. And yeah, I didn't at the time, like when it was all going down, I hadn't realized that how unexperienced Gustafsson was in, like, because you never know in the past, like, did he mix it up somewhere else? But no, like, this is a kid that doesn't have the history of Trent Frederic, who, is beating up his brother in the basement for years before getting into the NHL and getting into hockey. So yeah, it was definitely not a fair fight, and you don't like to see that. I'd rather have seen Frederic pick someone that, it could have actually been something rather than just one punch.
Yeah, I'm just learning about this now for the first time. I didn't realize that the combatant he fought was completely inexperienced. That's obviously not that definitely is weaselly, I think, from Frederic. I mean, that's just like the classic, not picking on somebody your own size in that regard. So
there's a chance he had no idea.
Well, I mean, I guess so, but I do think he probably recognized when you're a fighter on a team, and Frederic is, more than a fighter for the Bruins, but I think you do kind of glance at the other lineup before games just to kind of see who's who. And I think Frederic might know more than I think he might know a little bit more in that situation.
It'd be like if someone like that's an experienced NHL fighter last year just like grabbed Matt Patra.
Yeah, I mean, and so I could see the outrage if that's a comparable. Then and I'm a Winnipeg fan, then I would be absolutely saying that's bullshit. That an experienced fighter one punch somebody who hasn't fought before. That's not cool. Just learning about that now for the first time. I think the Kaslik Logan Stanley fight. I think Kaslik was trying to get back at him for going a little bit high on Pasternak earlier in the game. And then I think the Zadorov and Lohrei fight was a conversation between both players about let's do this now and end a nonsense for the rest of the game. I think that's what that was. And I think they both acknowledged that afterwards with some words.
Yeah. And I do want to point out, like, Gustafsson's 6'2", so, it's not like he's the same size as Patra or anything like that. Like he is a bigger kid. But yeah, I didn't like it. I mean, just for what we've already kind of touched on, like, now look, obviously he has every right to decline the fight. Like, he doesn't have to drop the gloves there. And the way, like, I don't even know if we got a good replay of like who even initiated it, honestly. So like Gustafsson didn't have to fight. So like I don't want to completely be like, oh, Trent Frederic just jumped him and like attacked him. Like, no, they both dropped the gloves. They were both ready to go. But yeah, I think, if you're Frederic and you're trying to send some sort of message, like it's gotta be against someone other than the kid who's never fought before at any level. So I totally get Winnipeg being unhappy with that. And I think Lohrei, like you see why he's their team captain. Like he's not going to go after an inexperienced guy. On the other side, he goes after the biggest guy on the team in Zadorov. So I'm sure Winnipeg probably feels pretty unified and good about themselves after that. Both the win and kind of that coming together. And if you're the Bruins, I don't know how you feel. Like I don't know if you feel great about those fights in the third period. Like what was the point of any of it? I mean, you're getting run off the ice. Like I guess it allows you to vent some frustration, but that's really about all it accomplished.
I mean, the point of it is to try to salvage anything of anything. It's not, there's still 12 and a half minutes left in the game. You're getting absolutely, blown away. It's honestly like a pride thing at that point. Now, I would say have some pride between the whistles. For sure, I'm with you on that. Like that's first and foremost. But to what Bridget said, when it rains, it pours, and they were in the middle of a burn the tape type of game, like we talked about earlier. And the problem with the Bruins is they've had about a handful plus of burn the tape games this year in the first quarter of the season. So that's not a good stat. But if you're the Bruins, you have to just move on. Unfortunately, they have some roster issues, and it's not going to be that easy. I think that Winnipeg, they're a fast team. They play fast. They have some guys that can skate. They didn't even have Nikolai Ehlers last night, but Kyle Connor, I think Connor McDavid in the Four Nations tournament and Nathan McKinnon, they're going to get a lot of attention for how fast they are, and Cale Makar. Kyle Connor is right there with them as it pertains to straight ahead speed. He is lightning when he's on the ice. And I think that you have players like him in Winnipeg that help drive that team's speed. And that was a problem for the Bruins. It was a problem for their forwards in the back check. It was a problem for the Bruins defense. I mean, Mason Lohrei, in the third period, I forget which goal it was, maybe the Velarde goal, but Kyle Connor gains the blue line, dishes it to the right-hand side, and just, boxes out Lohrei, and Lohrei was way too easy to be pushed over there. So team speed was a problem.
The Lohrei peak pair was rough.
They all were. I mean, Zadorov, Carlo.
I seemed to continue to notice it.
Yeah.
More often.
I think Lohrei's had a tough stretch recently in general. And that, this game stands out again for a lot of guys. But he's had, even like the last game, he had 2 turnovers at the offensive blue line, which is just, it's one of those places you just can't turn the 2 blue lines. You can't turn pucks over there. And he had a couple in the last game. Yeah. Getting out muscled, getting out positioned in the D zone. In this game, I don't know if like you need to sit him or healthy scratch him, but I think it's probably at least on the table among many other considerations. Obviously, there's only so much you can do. They only have 1 extra forward, 1 extra defenseman, so you can only do so much as far as lineup changes. But I wonder if that's in play. I will say, the second goal of the game that pairing was on the ice for, which is Scheifele buries it off a feed from Connor. That one I put more on the forwards. Pastrnak comes back and helps force what's starting to be a turnover, but then Pastrnak, Marchand, and Elias Lindholm all take off up ice, all fly the zone before the Bruins have actually secured possession. And Lohrei's still in a stick battle for the puck, and it gets whacked away. And now it's a 3-on-2 down low in the D zone. And I saw people saying like Lohrei or Peak. Like I saw people blaming both, like left Scheifele wide open. And it's like, it's a 3-on-2 and they cover the two lowest guys. And they were hoping that one of the three forwards was going to be back to cover Scheifele. And none of them worked. They had all taken off already. So that one I don't put on them as much. Like, the forwards skipped a step. They cheated. They cheated to offense.
Yeah, I mean, it's you're really noticing the absence of Hampus Lindholm right now. I mean, Osterley there's a reason why he's an AHL player primarily. We talked about how McAvoy's looked better with him. But when push comes to shove and the competition increases, and the skill level rises, Osterley's just not. He's he's not. He hasn't even been a consistent NHL player, let alone a top D-man, top pair D-man. So that's a bit of an issue for Boston right now, not having Lindholm. I see the ideology behind having Carlo and Zadorov as this long, lengthy shutdown D pair, but speed gives them issues. Speed gives them problems because they can't keep up. Their gaps just get exposed, and they can't transition the puck. I mean, Carlo in particular is not a puck mover, so you just kind of see them getting skated around in their own zone, and when they do get the puck, they're just kind of like there's not a lot of purpose. There's not a lot of playmaking anywhere on this roster right now, from the top players on down. So I don't know how sustainable that Zadorov Carlo pair can be if they're not going to be able to effectively move the puck and prevent rushes from happening. I think when you look at Carlo's tenure in Boston, he was pretty good with Torrey Krug, because he was the shutdown guy and Krug could be a one-man breakout. And then Carlo played a lot with Matt Grzelcyk over the years. Grzelcyk played a lot with McAvoy. He also played a lot with Carlo. And Grzelcyk was able to provide a similar element where he could be a one-man breakout. When Carlo looks over and his deep partner is Zadorov, well, there's no one-man breakout anymore. And I fear that there's not enough transition ability on that D pair, in addition to maybe a lack of foot speed. How do you guys feel about the D pairs last night, and with and without Lindholm in the lineup?
Well, I mean, definitely don't feel good last night. I feel like it wasn't that long. Like, last week I felt pretty good about these D pairs, but I think they've slipped a little and obviously completely collapsed in Winnipeg. I would bring Wotherspoon back in for someone, whether it's Lohrei or Osterley. I thought the Wotherspoon Carlo pairing when they were together was pretty good, and I think the numbers back that up. Both analytics and just they weren't on the ice for goals against. So I would do that, and then you can figure out the rest. One issue that, and I should have pulled it up as we started talking about this, but really the only partner that Mason Lohrei has had good results with on ice, and what I mean by that is goal differential, expected goals, shot attempts, like Corsi, all that stuff, like where it's actually been above water, has been Charlie McAvoy. Lohrei and Peak has not been a good pairing. Lohrei and Carlo has not clicked. Anything else has been very limited minutes, like a little bit of Lohrei Wotherspoon in there. But the only one of the regular right side defensemen that Lohrei has really been good with is McAvoy. So, and yet, like I'm sitting here saying, like I think Lohrei struggled recently. So it's like, has he earned a promotion up to the top pairing? No. So that's why I wonder if maybe he's a healthy scratch and watches for a game. And then maybe you bring him back in and put him with McAvoy and say, like, okay, here's a little mini reset for you. Get in, hopefully get in like a good practice in Seattle on Wednesday. Watch on the press box. Come back Saturday in Vancouver, and hope your game's back on track. But I do think you'll probably see a change Thursday in Seattle, because the pairings definitely were not good enough on Tuesday.
Yeah, I think Wotherspoon Peak, like, put them back together, take Lohrei out. That would be the first
I would put Wotherspoon with Carlo and Zadorov with Peak.
Okay.
Because to Brian's point, like Zadorov Carlo, I think has slipped as well.
So guys, why not? So aside from the potential go on the ninth floor and view for a game, has Osterley done enough to keep him in the lineup over Lohrei? So if you would you do Zadorov and Peak, Wotherspoon, Carlo, McAvoy, Lohrei?
You could. I think Osterley's been fine. I guess I don't feel strongly about it either way, but I just kind of feel like Lohrei might be at a point where the reset the night off like might be needed or might be a good thing. And Osterley, just trying to look here, amazingly was not on the ice for a goal against Tuesday night. I think he might have been the only him and Kastelik were the only two Bruins who were not on the ice for a Jets goal. So yeah, no, I'm actually now that I see that, I'm leaving him in. So
yeah,
okay,
I also feel like Kastelik is always that person that's never on the ice for a goal against somehow.
And Kastelik was going to be my answer, my only answer to did any Bruins play well, Bridget, when you asked like I just feel like Kastelik, he always brings the effort. I mean, so I can't knock him for that. I mean, he would be one answer. And I didn't realize Osterley was out there for no goal. So you know what? Okay, fair enough. He looked to get hemmed in a few times. He had some turnovers on the wall. Maybe those just kind of blinded me a little bit from how he played overall.
Yeah, like I can't sit here and say like he was awesome or anything, but I was like, as we started talking, I was thinking, I was like, was he on the ice for any of the goals? So just wanted to check and see if that actually held up. And yeah, and he played 21 minutes too.
Is he the best player on the Bruins?
Is he going to win the Norris Trophy?
Should we start having that conversation now?
Yeah, I mean, Lohrei was -3, and Osterley was, just right there, right at the even line, and nobody was plus anything because, yeah.
Can we talk about the forwards, guys? The forward personnel. How do we feel about? So I think last night was a game where Winnipeg's big boys showed up, and on the score sheet, at least outside of the Pasternak goal, like you want to see fire fight fire there, and I feel like Winnipeg's best player is obviously better than Boston's, but look, there's clearly a talent deficiency up front for Boston. They have holes right now, and until they find a way, if they can, to appropriately address those, they're going to continue to have that. So there's going to be a desire to want more from Boston's personnel up front. That's just going to be the situation until it no longer is. But how do we feel further down the bottom six? This fourth line of Koepke, Beecher, and McLaughlin. I like Mark McLaughlin. I feel like he kind of didn't get a ton of opportunity in recent years when Boston had a competitive roster and not a lot of openings. And I thought he's a guy who's made good on some opportunities in the past, but he does seem to be a little bit behind the play with some foot speed. I don't have his face-off numbers in front of me, but visually it looked like he was losing a lot of face-offs last night, but it could be one of those stats where I look at the score sheet and maybe he was 500. I don't know.
No, he was 1 for 5.
Okay. So how do we feel about his call-up so far? And I know the fourth line is probably the least of the Bruins' offensive issues, but if we're going to talk about personnel on the D pairs, let's talk about some personnel and potential changes up front.
Well, McLaughlin almost scored. I would say like he had the best opening period chance or at least close to that. He had a backdoor chance that he almost put in, and it was a little bit of an unlucky bounce, the way that it ended up going back right into the goalie. So that was a good play. I think Beecher set that up, but I thought that he goes to the right areas a lot of the time. So he's a guy that does the basic like fourth line thing, right? Go to the net, be available in front of the net for rebounds and tip-ins and stuff. And he was he did that at least on that play, and I've noticed him since he was called up having sometimes when he actually is making plays with the puck, like when he has it on his stick, he looks confident. And maybe he needs to play a little bit better away from the puck, but like I said, still a lot of times he's going to the right areas for it's simple hockey. I mean, obviously he doesn't get a lot of time, so that limits our ability to really judge it too much. But thought he had a good chance in the first.
Yeah, I think he's been solid. I think that line has more or less done what you need a fourth line to do. Like they've been good defensively. They're not giving up chances. Now the next step is you got to score every now and then. Like obviously that's not your primary job, but that line, as a line, they have not scored yet since being put together. So that will have to happen at some point. We talked a lot last season about how your fourth line never scored when it was, what was it, like Lauko, Boquist, Steen, I think was in that mix. Like that line would go like 20 games without scoring. So you can't have that where they're not doing anything offensively. So like that does have to be the next step. And I think, had McLaughlin buried that chance, it's like maybe that changes this game. Maybe it changes some things for that line. You're feeling a little better about it.
It made it 1-0 or at least 1-1. It was in the first like 12 minutes or so.
Yeah, I think that was before Winnipeg had scored. So yeah, I think it would have been a Bruins lead. But yeah, I actually think this lineup that the Bruins have had, for outside of like the one in-game change to loading up Marchand, Lindholm, Pastrnak, like they've been rolling with this lineup for, a good, 6-7 games here. And I feel like it's been probably their best lineup that they found on the season, which again, like very low baseline here. Like, the bar is on the ground, but
and the best lineup just gave up 8 goals.
Right, which is the obvious problem and why we're discussing possible changes, because when you lose 8-1, anything is on the table. I guess I would be a little more hesitant to shake things up front, just because I did like the way that this lineup was playing, and I might give them a chance to respond Thursday in Seattle and see if they can get back on track for the rest of the road trip. But look, if you want to mix in Tyler Johnson because he brings a little more offensive pop, you're probably not calling someone up mid-road trip, although, I guess that could be an option. I'm not opposed to that either. Again, you lost 8-1. Like everything can and should be on the table. But I wouldn't be. Well, Korpisalo should start Thursday.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, guys, and there's logistical reasons as to why Scott just mentioned your mid road trip, your Midwestern road trip, nonetheless. And yes, the lineup has been playing okay. The look they did in Chicago, and I do believe they started the Philly game like this, and they didn't go too hot. So that's the problem with this Bruins team. There's not enough consistency with any combination they've gone with. Some combinations look good for a cup of coffee, and then they don't for a full game. But like the combination I'm talking about is what Scott mentioned, which is loading up on that top line with Pastrnak, Lindholm, and Marchand. By the way, Lindholm, he's still snake bitten, but you can see his chances are they're there. But the geeky Zaka Brazeau line, I don't know. I wouldn't mind seeing that either. But either way, you look at the lineup right now, and you just realize there's just a lack of speed and natural foot speed. Now, we've talked about in the past how team speed is more than just individual foot speed. Okay, it's about how quick you make decisions and how synchronized you play as a team. But you watched Winnipeg, you watch how fast they are. You're going to see some fast teams with not Seattle, Edmonton, Vancouver. And I just think to myself, I know they're unfinished products, but you have some foot speed down in Providence with Lysell. I know he hasn't even played a game, and it's crazy to think he hasn't even played one NHL game yet. I'm not saying he's earned it, overwhelmingly, but he has some natural foot speed. Matt Patra can bring you some speed. You have some speed in the system, at least compared to what you have in the NHL roster right now. And I'm not saying right now is the time, but foot speed's an issue. And I think that you owe it to yourself as an organization to at least see what you can do internally at some point.
Yeah, and Patra has picked it up down in Providence. Like we talked last week, and I said one of those guys, whether it's Patra or Lysell, throw Merkulov in, even though I know he doesn't have the foot speed, like in terms of this exact discussion, but just talking about, a young kid, like I said, one of them has to force their way up. Like they have to do what Mark McLaughlin did down there, which is, string together some good games. Patra has started to do that. He had a really good weekend. You can, check out our friend Mark Diver wrote about it, tweeted about it. So you can get more there, but he scored a few goals and was on the score sheet, was playing well, even outside of the points. So maybe he's getting close to forcing his way back.
It was funny because I talked to Mark at Providence College, I think on Friday, and he was like, yeah, Patra's not doing anything. And then Patra has a great weekend and starts scoring. And yeah.
By the way, speaking that's almost like, kind of a reverse jinx. My Twitter reverse jinx powers were incredible last night. Guys,
yeah, what do you do now?
It was one of my finest nights. So I tweeted about how I can never type Scheifele right the first time. And then he immediately scored like a minute after my tweet. And then he scored again. So,
he kind of does that.
Yeah. And then I tweeted that I really liked the way I think this was like during the second intermission. I tweeted that at least the Marchand, Lindholm, Brazeau line was having a good game and creating chances, which they were. Shots were like 8-1 Bruins or something with them on the ice. And then their first shift of the third period, Marchand commits that turnover inside the blue line and ends up in the back of the net. And I'm like, you know what? Forget it. Like, I'm just not going to tweet the rest of the night.
That's not a reverse jinx. That's just a regular jinx. That's just a jinx. You said they were doing something good, true. And then they made you, yeah.
Okay, yeah, fair enough.
Like when I say, oh, maybe this person's going to have a shutout, and my cameraman yells at me, don't say the word shutout, and don't say the word overtime.
A couple of years ago, when I was sending Scott my articles for EEI, the one name that always tripped me up, I would always have to Google it, even though I knew I was typing it right. I would always Google it to double check. Was Grzelcyk.
Yep.
And then eventually it gets to the point where like off the top of your head, but for the first like few weeks, the first month, I was like, how the fuck do you spell Grzelcyk again?
Yeah.
But yeah, you get it. There's some names like that. Scheifele is one of them.
Yeah, I just want to skip the I. It's every time it's just Shefflin. I'm like, oh yeah, there's an I in there.
Yep. All right. So, any other takeaways from this game, guys? I mean, again, we talked about it. It's burn the tape type game. Nothing good happened really at all. Where do we want to go from here? Look ahead, or any final takeaways?
Well, so I mentioned Marchand's post game comments about Swayman, but also wanted to mention his comments about their practicing, because he said, let me pull it up. He said he was asked basically like, is it frustrating because you had been playing better, 7-2-0, all that. And he said like, yeah, but this was coming. Our practices have been sloppy. Our execution has been off there, and it bleeds into games. The way you practice is how you play. It starts there, and we weren't good enough. So we need to do a better job of being good in practice, and that will translate to games. Now, I was not at Monday's practice, unfortunately. Brian, I don't know if you were. Did you?
No.
Yeah, I was stuck in meetings, so I wasn't able to get over there. But I did. I heard that from a couple people that like it looked like a sloppy practice. And I was at, I think, Friday practice. I think that was their last one of last week. And thought some of that looked sloppy, especially the power play work, which is not new. That has often looked sloppy in practice. But yeah, it does. At least that Monday practice, it seems like that was a pretty rough one for them, which I think like you can almost write that off as like, well, they played Saturday afternoon, off day Sunday, you're maybe kind of shaking off the weekend cobwebs. But it seems like it was probably something more than that. And maybe they actually did kind of let things slip and not launch themselves into this road trip the right way.
Well, Scott, how great were their training camp practices in their first month of the season practices under Montgomery?
Not good.
Okay, so now we're a month into a new coach and they're already having sloppy practices again. Like, what's the common denominator here? Like, there's I wasn't there. I didn't see it, but I have seen a lot of practices this year, and I intend to see more when they get back from this road trip. But that's a player thing. There's something that's telling me there's something up with this mix. I mean, I don't know. I'm kind of at a loss for words for that. That's just unacceptable. Like how many times are we going to hear this or see this? Like figure it out. You think the Jets, captained by Adam Lohrei, who is a guy who gets it, you think he allows them to have too many practices like that? No. It seems to me that this Bruins team the outliers have been the good practices this year. And that's not acceptable. What's the reasoning for that?
Well, and just think about I've been covering the team since 2020. When I started, there was no fans in the stands, but Scott, you've been doing it a little longer, right? And ever since then, I can't remember another time besides this season that we heard about like bad practices. Like maybe the one time they bag skated them, but like that was just a message. It wasn't like a consistent, hey, why are we not practicing right? This is definitely unique to this season, it feels like.
Because somebody like Bergeron probably wouldn't let it happen, or Chara, or at least let it continue to happen.
I was gonna say I started covering them the 2010-11 season when their practices were like legendary, where guys were saying our practices are harder than our games, and you had Chara and Bergeron going all out, and it's like I think Marchand still tries to bring that. Like I think he still has that in him, and he practices hard. I don't know, for whatever reason, it seems like not enough other guys are following. And ironically, Marchand was, one of the sloppier players Tuesday. So it's like, he did include himself in that quote. It was like all like we, us. So it's not like he's pointing the finger at other guys. But like even his game was clearly off. Like I said, like that turnover, one of three forwards who flies the zone on that second Winnipeg goal. Like, so, it's not, even if like he's practicing hard, it's not like that benefited him at all on Tuesday. He looked just as off as anyone else. So, yeah, I don't know why. And I will say, like, I think after the coaching change, they were having better practices. Like, it did look like the pace had picked up. Most of their practices are 40 minutes, maybe 45. And like, they looked like good, hard practices. And it seemed that was reflected in their play. Like when you talk about being more structured and more attention to detail, it's like that starts with good practices. So it's not like it's not like they changed coaches and then nothing at all changed. It like they were practicing better for a while there. And again, I don't know. Again, like, are we talking about a 1 day slip up, 2 days? Was this the last week that they have felt like this? Like, it's definitely more recent because I don't think this has been happening the entire time since Sacco took over. Like, there was an uptick there, so why has it now slid back? Like, that's obviously what they need to figure out and fix.
But the uptick, I mean, there's no guarantees in life, okay? But to have an uptick in intensity in your initial practices in this market after a coaching change, as close to a guarantee as possible. Like to not have intensity following the coaching change and in those initial practices with all eyes on them. I mean, you guys know how jam packed that media room gets up there, and to me, like that was an automatic that they were going to have an uptick there. The sustainability was not an automatic, and that's what we're seeing right now. Now, I will tell you guys this: there's a lot of hockey for these guys from, call it, September through April. You've got 82 games, 41 of them entail travel. And for, of the 82 games, how many of them have morning skates? 70, 75. And so even when you're watching the Bruins on TV, they've already driven to the practice that day or taken a team bus, and they've already put their skates on that day. Then you have practice days in between. So from the players' perspectives, they're probably like, guys, we are on the ice constantly. It's impossible to, it gets very monotonous. It's human nature. And they just kind of go through the motions. Unfortunately, the best teams don't do that. They won't allow that to happen. It's because their schedule is so condensed during their season. They're on the ice a lot, and it's tough. It's tough to battle human nature sometimes. But like I said, that's if you want to be the best teams are more oftentimes than not, they're going to the rink every single day with a purpose, knowing what their job is because they're professionals, and that you do play the way you practice. And I think that right now, I think the Bruins have a mix of players for whatever reason where they just treat these practices and these pregame skates, like a stroll for the most part. I mean, they're not super intense. If you go to a Bruins practice, they sprinkle onto the ice, within 5 minutes of each other. They're all shooting pucks, skating around. And then it's just kind of, I don't know, there's not a lot of physicality. There's not a lot of emulation of what happens or simulation of what happens in real game scenarios. And I think what you're talking about, Scott, in the 2010-11 team, that team practiced at Ristusha Arena as if their teammates had Montreal Canadiens logos on. And until you play like that in practice, you're not creating the habits that are required for game nights.
Yeah, and look, like obviously you can't really do that every day either. Like guys are gonna get hurt, like if you're going too hard in practice. So like there has to be some sort of balance, but what kind of gets me though, and to like circle this all the way back to the beginning, it's like I would almost understand like some human nature creeping in where you get out over your skis a little bit, 7-2-0 run, 4-game winning streak. You start to think you're a little better than you are. Like that happening over the course of a season, you're like, okay, yeah, that probably happens to most teams. Except it doesn't fly here because, again, as we said off the top, it's like this was the game that you were always building to. Like this was the big test. Winnipeg Jets, one of the best teams in the league. I think they're tied for the best record in the NHL. Like this was always the game to circle of like, yeah, everything else was like that was almost like your new like preseason now leading into, your first real test. So there shouldn't have been any sort of like human nature of, oh yeah, we're kind of just on cruise control right now. And whoops, I guess we needed a wake up call. It's like, no, just seeing the Winnipeg Jets on your schedule should have been enough to get your attention. So like, that's where it happening on, these 2 days, this Monday and Tuesday makes it like even more frustrating where it's like, this isn't, you weren't like looking past an opponent or something. Like this is a game you should have gotten up for.
You just hope it doesn't affect the entire road trip and like send this road trip into a downward spiral right from the beginning because they still have 4 games left in the road trip, and a lot of those games are later, like we mentioned. But when I this keeps coming into my head, so I just have to say, what was this thing that Marchand said to Biz about? He said, "Oh, I heard you got your wheels knocked off" or something like that.
Oh, okay, yeah. Scott, you
That's what happened to the Bruins. That's what happened to the Bruins in Winnipeg.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, every time I was like, "Oh, they to quote Brad Marchand, they got their wheels knocked off." And they have to find a way to recover and, not, like you said, burn the tape, not hold on to it, not repeat it against Seattle or, the final 4 games of this road trip.
Yeah, I mean, look, if good teams don't allow this to fluster the rest of a road trip. Like if the Bruins allow last night to make them go 0-4 on this trip or one win, then they're not a good enough team, and they deserve what they get. Like, it wasn't too long ago where the Bruins never lost more than 2 games in a row, like ever. Like during the Bruce Cassidy era, certainly the early Montgomery era. Like the Bruins might lose 2 games in a row occasionally. They're not losing a third. This Bruins team, they haven't shown that they have that mental and physical strength to stop the storm a little bit, stop the bleeding. But look, entering last night, and the same holds true as we speak. Despite being 7-2 in their last 9 games under Joe Sacco, the Bruins entered that game last night, points percentage wise, as the second wild card team in the East. So they have 30 games played. They're third in the Atlantic via points because they played a lot more games. They played more games than most of the teams. But if we're going off point percentage, they're the last playoff team in the East right now. There should be zero complacency or comfortability when you're that team, when you know how well you've had to play in the last 9 games just to get to that point.
They actually have slid just ahead of the Rangers. So they're now up to the first wild card. Rangers are
falling apart.
Absolute disaster.
Well, what do you mean, Scott? So you have the Lightning or the first wild card team with 577, and then
Lightning are third in the Atlantic.
Why is NHL.com telling me that they're in the wild card right now?
So I'm going by points percentage. The Atlantic, you have Florida, Toronto, Tampa as the top 3.
Yep.
Metro, you have Washington, Carolina, New Jersey.
Yep.
And then on points percentage, Bruins are just ahead of the Rangers for 7th, Rangers 8th, Flyers behind them.
Got it. I see what you're saying. Okay. Got it. Fair enough. Still, point stands, like you have to be there's no room for complacency or comfortability right now if you're them. So I don't know. This team, I'm getting the sense, guys, and I think we all have, this team, they are who they are. They're a Jekyll and Hyde, win 2, lose 2. It's what they've been so far.
Well, and this is where this was always going to be a big road trip. To build off what Bridget was saying, like the rest of this road trip is now really interesting to me because if a couple losses do pile up here, or they come out of this 2-3, or like even 1-4, obviously would be really bad. Then I think we're saying like maybe not all that much actually changed under Sacco, and maybe this team is back to just trading wins and losses and can't beat good teams and all that. But if you bounce back, and I'm not saying you need to win out and win 4 straight, but if you win 3 of 4 the rest of this road trip and you play well and you don't have another stinker like you just did in Winnipeg, like you might still come out of that feeling like, okay, there was the one really bad game, but overall, like it's still an upward trajectory. Like, okay, they responded to that awful night well. Like that's now really important for this team because I think that would still be a positive change over earlier in the season, where a bad night would turn into a second bad night and a third, and eventually a coach getting fired. Like now they have a chance to show that these aren't going to build on top of each other. You're not going to follow up a bad night with another one. Like, so Thursday night in Seattle, now really important for this team. And the rest of this road trip, really important for this team.
Yeah, I mean they have a lot of good competition coming up. Like they haven't been able to beat a lot of good teams this year. So if they're able to win 3 or 4 of their next 5 or 6, then you're doing so beating, a combination of, Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, Washington after the road trip. I mean, they got some teams that have been playing really well. So if they can get some wins here against those teams, then okay, yeah, maybe they have turned a corner. But right now, it's just a big if. Right now, I think we can all see them beating Seattle and Buffalo, maybe, but like losing to some of those good teams outside of that.
Well, and then right after Christmas is a back-to-back.
Yeah, I mean,
Columbus.
We'll see. Like again, they played well against Vancouver. I know they lost that game, but can you do that again on the road? Vancouver, by the way, has been an oddly terrible home team. I'm just like 4-6-4 at home. Like they've been awesome on the road. So, maybe not as tough of an environment as you would think. But yeah, it is like Seattle's should be winnable. That's a team that has been struggling a little bit. Calgary has slipped a little recently. Like those are games that you should have a good chance of winning. Vancouver and Edmonton are better teams, but again, you should be competing with them. Like what you can't have happen is another Tuesday night where you just get run off the ice and embarrassed.
Yeah. Seattle under the playoff cut, Calgary under the playoff cut. So yeah, those are definitely the two you look at as the ones you want to see them play well in, because it's more of an equal or lesser than opponent, which I always hate saying that though, because it changes so often, like how good teams are playing, and I'm not supposed to say that in my broadcast, so I try not to. But you don't want to call anyone a lesser opponent necessarily, because maybe those people are looking at you as it's always bulletin board material, I guess you could say.
See, yeah, that's a league broadcaster concern, and
yes, it is.
not a Bruins podcaster concern.
That is, I have, that's my other job creeping in as per usual. By the way, you like this guy?
Oh yeah, Bridget's got a Bruins gnome.
I decorated a little differently, and he's guarding the Scott's Pops puck.
Oh, nice, very nice.
We appreciate that.
Well, guys, let's see how the Bruins respond here. I mean, it's a long season. We all know that. I think, honestly, one of the more troubling things we even talked about, in my opinion, today was just their continued practice habits. I mean, I don't – it's not a sign of a good team to not practice well. So, I mean, it's – on the one hand, you talk about, like, can they string together, some big win streaks this year and play better against better teams and become one of those better teams. And until you're a good practice team, I just don't see how you become that good game team. So to me, it starts there. Like, and right now they're on a road trip, so it's going to be nothing more than probably morning skates. So, that is what it is. But until they're back at Warrior and they're habitually having good hard practices, and I mentioned the whole look at your teammate like they have a Canadians logo on. I'm kind of being over the top there. I'm just saying, like, you want to practice hard, and so they got to become that team before they become a great team on game night, and that's not a good thing to hear. I got that shit has to change and change when they get home.
Yeah, but I will note, like, because this is kind of a little bit more of a spaced out road trip, they do actually have some full practices built in. Wednesday afternoon, they have a full practice in Seattle. I believe Monday they have one scheduled in Calgary. And maybe depending on how they're feeling at the time, but I think Wednesday in Edmonton, they might have one as well. So, this is a little bit different than like the road trip where you're constantly just game travel. They actually do have a couple built in here.
Maybe we should fly out and check them out, see how they're doing, or maybe our friend Kevin Paul Dupont will be or Fluto will be on the scene reporting.
Yeah, well, let's just fly out to Vancouver and, just out to northern Canada right before Christmas just to watch practice. Just practice.
And not even stay for the game. I'm just saying just for practice.
And then come back. And then maybe go back for the next practice and then come back.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, Bridget, Scott, any final takeaways here? We good?
Good.
I'm good. Much better
Melvin
than the
started trying to talk, so we gotta go.
Okay.
Wednesday night, big BU UMass game. The Scott Bridget rivalry renews.
Nice. Maybe you guys can watch that before the Bruins play it. Oh, you said Wednesday night.
Yeah.
Oh,
Wednesday
okay,
night.
cool. Is that where is that?
That's out in Amherst. So
Okay.
I will not be there. Not driving out there in the like borderline hurricane or whatever we get going on.
Yeah, it is 60 degrees, but it is pouring. So
yeah.
All right. Well, thank you guys very much. Thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you on Friday. Hey guys, thanks for watching the Skate Podcast. If you want to see more of our videos, visit our playlist.
not in front of a screen, you can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment.